creativity, it's all about exploring and just having that curiosity in mind. And people tend to think that this is only that applies to artists, but this applies for everything, right? For like our careers, for if we want to build a brand, if we want to build a good business idea, strong business idea, we got to be creative, right? Welcome to another episode of Business Conversations with Sergio. And today I got a very special guest with Eddie White. We're gonna have a conversation about creativity today because he's a very creative person. He's an artist, filmmaker, he's an actor actually. And we're gonna have a conversation about creativity and how we can use creativity in our life, in our professional journeys. He lives currently in Colombia, in Bogota, and then he got a very interesting story, which is like he has drawn like all these different things about our culture. He has done it in drawings. He's sort of a bridge between the Latin American culture and the Australian culture. Tell us, Eddie, about a bit about yourself. You're from Adelaide as
Yeah,
well. Um, like, how have you, like become Eddie White, the one who do all these drawings, and he
yeah.
became pretty much someone who like it's very well known in the community.
Thanks for having me, Sergio, for starters. This is really fun. Yeah, well, look, it's funny because if I walk down the street in Australia, the only people that recognize me are Colombians or Latinos. if I walk in Bogota, people stop me. It's very surreal being an Australian in such a populated country and people recognizing you for for your drawings, which is amazing because that's all I really what I wanted in my life was to create things that people responded to positively. Had a positive impact on people. So yeah, it's basically like the version of me that has been since I arrived in Colombia 5 years ago. It's sort of like one chapter of my life creatively, but it's been probably the most um, rewarding chapter in an interesting way, because I just did it all by myself. And I think when you do something completely by yourself, it's sort of like you are free from trying to please people because I think when you are yourself and people respond to that, it's incredible feeling. And so when I draw things that I love or that I'm interested in or that I think are funny, and then people respond to that, then that's kind of the best thing you can have.
Of
So
course, yes. But early in your career, it's interesting your journey because early in your career you started as an actor and then you moved to become more like a filmmaker. And then how was that journey? Like, how do you realize, okay, I'm going to do some like drawings? How
yeah,
how was that?
I mean, I've always done drawing. That's sort of been the through line of my life. And I think that, like, long as I can remember, I was drawing. So it's like eating or drinking. I don't even remember when I started it. So I probably started when I was like 2 or something like that. And the other things are like almost like little extensions of that. So I wanted to write a book when I was a child, so I would draw and write. So then I became a writer as well. And then when I was doing animation, I was drawing, but then making the move. And then when I was an actor, I was being characters, but not through drawings. It was through myself, and as a filmmaker as well, working with actors. So they all feel linked in a funny way because, like, at the core, it's about creativity and being an artist, and not being a choice. I think the difference between being a creative and being an artist is creative. You can do another job. You could do a day job. You could do a artist is like an obsession, a compulsion, where you have to do that. If you don't do that, you feel like you're not living. And so I think when people like musicians are like that, when they always releasing music, is that they have to do it. They're not just doing it to please you; they're doing it for themselves. So I feel a bit like that with drawing. I feel like that was my way to explore the world, to be curious about the world, and it continued into my adult years in different forms.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very a great example of someone following their passion, right?
Yeah.
Which is quite important to, at the end of the day, to be successful. That's what I will call someone successful, right?
What
If
is successful? You know, people say, "Oh, what's successful?" It's like, for me, success is being like enriched in what you're doing, whatever you're doing. So you can be successful and be a parent, and that might be all you do, and that's great. Or you could be successful and be a chef, or whatever it is. So I think that the idea of success, I think people attribute to money or they attribute to fame, but really, I mean, those are just byproducts that sometimes happen to a small percentage of people. And the other things are just, like, success is like getting up every day and feeling like, oh, I get to do this. And that's how I still feel. I still feel like, sometimes it's hard financially, or it's hard consistency wise, but I still get up every day and go, oh, what can I draw today? Or what do I get to draw? You know?
it's a lot of work behind, right? People don't see that.
Yeah.
And when you want to follow your passion not necessarily you can monetize on your passion. So you sort of have to make your own. And that's the interesting thing about your journey, because you're also an entrepreneur. Like you have built your own brand, right?
Yeah.
Which is something that I love, and that's what I found like where we can both meet, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm coming from this background of running a restaurant, which is in the Latin community here in Australia, which at the time, 10 years ago, no one knew here in Australia about Latin American culture, or not as much as they know now, right?
Mm.
We were all Mexican then, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, I saw that and I built my business for locals more than really Latinos.
Latino.
Latinos were always welcome, but we try to like translate that, and that translate well into the culture, right? Which is important in business, right? So, and you did exactly the same. You like understood our culture and trying to translate into you have that mind, curiosity mind, and you translate our sayings,
Mm.
our food, our very specific details about our culture.
Yeah.
uh,
I'm like, I was
and
with
how that happened?
yeah,
How do you realize that that was an
yeah,
opportunity there?
for sure. I think a lot of people think creating a brand is something you do very intentionally. You come up with a logo, and then you come up with a service, and then da 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 da. But for me, in this instance, because the brand was me, the brand was very much what I do. It was very organic. Like, when I left for Colombia to leave Australia, I had a brand in a way. My drawings had a brand, but there was nothing about Colombia about them. They had a sort of a sensual, kind of cheeky, poetic, sometimes sexy vibe. And that's what it was. There was nothing inherently cultural about them, as far as like, this is a Colombian expression, or this is. When I came to Colombia, just for my own interest, I'm like, oh, I'll start to explore elements of the culture through my drawings. And because it didn't feel out of place, because they were sensual or funny or delicious or flavorsome. And so suddenly,
Exotic.
you know what I mean? And suddenly you had this following. Suddenly I had this following of people who not only, well, I had the first following of people who wanted my sexy drawings, they wanted my sensual drawings, mainly women, mainly Latinas. Then when I started drawing about Colombian culture a few months into living here, then I had this huge, big following suddenly of many more people, mainly in Colombia. I had to reassess. I'm like, what is my brand? Because my brand when I arrived is different to my brand now. Like, I had to kind of reassess what my brand was. I didn't have a logo or anything at that stage. It was like, who am I? Who am I as an artist? And I looked at my drawings and I thought, okay, what have all these drawings got in common? Whether they're about food, music, dance, language, they all had flavor. So in my mind, it was like dibujos con sabor. And it's like, that's all, and y flow, because I think that, you can draw many things under that banner, because you can draw about food, love, romance, sex, music, everything. And it's got flavor. So ultimately, I wanted my
The wall is your oyster.
yeah, and that's the way I like to view my mind, and that's the way I like to view my drawing. So that was kind of the path I went down with my brand. And since then, it grew and grew and grew. And now I think if you ask most of my followers, and it still blows me away that there's that many people following me, because when I came here I had about 4,000 followers and now I've got over 300,000. So coming to Latin America, things for me that staying in Australia wouldn't have as an artist population, because of the, Colombians are very big on Instagram, bigger than Australians, you know what I mean? And they're very engaged. They're very engaged people.
And also, we're very passionate about culture, right? We love our own culture, maybe because we're an older continent.
Yeah,
So we have more. Australia is for the viewers who don't really understand Australia, Australia is a relatively new country in terms of culture. We're developing, we're doing a
yeah.
very interesting
Very diverse
journey.
culturally, like Colombia is
Very,
diverse within Colombian culture, but Australia is diverse
yeah.
within Asian cultures, African cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, European cultures, etc., etc. So drawing about Australian culture is actually much more a work in progress. You know what I mean? Like, if I drew about Australian things, people think, okay, meat pie, footy, kangaroos,
Vegemite.
Vegemite, which, they're part of Australian culture, but Australian culture now is not what it was in the 50s. Whereas Colombian culture is kind of the same, you know what I mean? Like, it hasn't changed that much in the last, 40, 50 years. Obviously, there's little elements, but mostly like the music, people still love the old music, people still love the old dishes, people still love the mythic, the folklores, the dichos, the remedies, the superstitions, all of those things. They're baked into the culture. So drawing about them is like, I can post something each year and it's fresh. It doesn't look passe. Australia, things change so quickly in Australia. One Christmas people are cooking this, the next Christmas they're cooking that. It's not like every year they have buñuelos and natilla like in Colombia or Venezuela. You got the dishes that they have in Venezuela as well. So I think that makes it interesting to draw about, and it makes it sort of fun to draw about. Whereas drawing about Australian culture, it was too familiar to me. You know what I mean? Like, people say to me, why didn't you draw about Australian culture? And I'm like, it's like when it's right here, it's sometimes not
You
very.
don't see it, right?
Yeah, you don't see it. You can't see the forest for the trees. Whereas Colombia, it was like I landed from another planet in this new planet, like being born again, and seeing everything like a baby would, and that makes interesting drawings. You know.
That's interesting, Eddie, and that's something that I like to, unpack a little bit more, right? Because it's all about that, right? Creativity, it's all about exploring and just having that curiosity in mind. And people tend to think that this is only that applies to artists, but this applies for everything, right? For like our careers, for if we want to build a brand, if we want to build a good business idea, strong business idea, we got to be creative, right? And I realized recently that was a piece missing in my puzzle, like the creativity aspect. I'm an engineer, that's my background, right? And when I started engineering, I thought, I'll be creating these amazing, like equipments and like things that you picture as a child. And then when you study, it's a totally different story, right? But then back then, I was attracted to creativity. And time went by, and then I realized, well, I thought, as everyone else, that probably I wasn't creative or that creative.
Mm.
And then recently, teaching creativity at Macquarie Uni, I realized that that was the piece that it was missing for me. That was the piece that, like it's important to. And I went recently to an innovation day here from Amazon. They have this speech with the director of Alexa
Mhm.
here in Australia, Kate Wooden. And she was talking about that, like we gotta allow ourselves to explore the world with that curiosity, right? But that's something that we tend to think that will happen organically or naturally. I'd like you to, Eddie, to just like share. Well, let's talk about that. How that's happened to you. What techniques,
Yeah,
strategies. For me, for example, when I go for walks, I
yeah,
tend to listen to music,
yeah,
or I travel, I get really creative. Like that's my
yeah,
jam. That's when I'm like
yeah,
I
yeah.
could be really come out with really good,
To-
interesting like things. So
Totally.
how is that for you?
Well, I think it changes. I think when I was younger, when I was a child, I used to go into the garden, and we had this big garden, and I used to dream about, the insects and the animals and the stories, and that was my creative space. Or I'd read books, or watch, cartoons and that kind of stuff, and that was my creative place. I think when I got older, it became about travel, and I think that travel, and it doesn't have to be international travel. It doesn't have to. It could be traveling in your own city. You know what I mean? Going to a market, going to an interesting place. You know what I mean? I think that all of those things end up inspiring you in some way. And so I think me moving to Colombia was almost like, the giant version of that. It was like, okay, we're going to travel, but you're going to live there. You know what I mean? So like living in a whole other country. So I haven't really had to come up with any ways of finding ideas here, because the ideas just come at me every day. Like when you immerse yourself in a culture, it's impossible not to be inspired. It was different in Australia. Some days I'd be working from home and I wouldn't leave the house too much. And so I'd have to find ways to access that creative inspiration, and one of them was watching old movies or looking through old books, often old things, because it allowed me to dream, of another time, of another place. I was never into sort of like contemporary things as a way of inspiring myself. I was always into old things, and I think one of the reasons Colombia works is because part of Colombia feels stuck in time. There's a beautiful feeling of like not everything feels globalized and modernized and that kind of thing like it does in Australia. You walk down the street in Australia, you're in 2025. You know what I mean? In Sydney. Whereas like in Colombia, you can go to some pueblos, you could be in the 1950s. There's no change. So I guess for an artist, it's a very cool place to go that. But it's interesting in saying that. When I was living in Australia, I was very much like a nostalgic person, very like thinking about the past or the future, and I wasn't very present. I wasn't a very present artist in Australia. I was a very past artist and a very future artist. Whereas in Colombia, I feel like I'm a very present artist. It made me more present being in Latin America, because I think Latin America innately is more present than Australia or USA or Europe, because, I think there's just so much going on that you kind of have to be present in Latin America. Because imagine going to like Mardi Gras and not being present, or imagine going to, a Plaza Mercado and not being present. You've got to be present for those things, those experiences. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing that happened. I became more present, which I think it really makes you a better artist when you're more present.
It's such an interesting concept, right? Like how can you be present though?
Yeah,
Like that's something like
not
living, because like you're constantly thinking, especially living in a country like Australia. For me, it has been like I almost feel like we live our such a like quick life, right? Like we like on the go all the time because we have to do
Australia is
so
all
many things. It's a very fast pace,
yeah.
like all about productivity.
The next
And when it comes to
yeah,
creativity, it feels like you gotta slow down. You gotta like like allow to have like time off.
yeah.
And
You can't be thinking about the outcome too much, because I think if all you're thinking about is the outcome, you rob yourself of enjoying the actual process of creating a drawing or creating a song or whatever it is you're creating. I think if you live in the moment, you've got an eye on the product, of course. You know what you want the drawing to look like, or you know what the thing needs to be. But if that becomes the focus, then this, which you spend majority of the time doing, particularly with animation, you're spending 2 years making a film, and then you release it. Well, great, you enjoy the awards, you enjoy showing people, that's great. But if you don't enjoy all that creative process of making that movie, then what a waste of your time, you know what I mean? So that's been really important for me, because I think with movies, I used to write movies and I'd be thinking, oh, what's it got to be, rather than letting myself enjoy the process.
by saying that, Eddie, so how do you feel like it's a failed project? Because creativity is also like a lot of trial and error. I feel like it might be something that is in your mind, but not necessarily the end result will be something that
Yeah.
reflect what you have in mind initially.
Mm.
So what do you consider like a failed project or
I
like a failed
think,
creative project? Or is it like, is even a thing in creativity
well,
or is even,
I guess if you enjoy it, if you, biggest failure for me is if I don't like it. You know what I mean? So it's like usually there's a crossover. Usually, if I like it, other people like it, or if other people love it, then I've got more of an affinity with it. Sometimes I'll draw something that I love that people just don't respond to, or I draw something thinking, oh, they're going to love this, and they don't respond to it. So what I've learned to do is that you can't beat yourself up over, you know, because sometimes it can be like a slight execution thing, a color you use, a certain composition that, like I did one drawing, I remember, and it was called Ella es la reina, como reinado, reinada, and it was a woman always facing away, but she had the crown on, she had the gown, she had all the the things, and all the little descriptions saying what she was, and it was like I posted it, and it was like it did moderately, like for a country that has a lot of reinados, I was like, oh, okay. And I spoke to a reina. I said, oh, just a matter of fact, like, why do you think this drawing didn't really impact? She's like, oh, because there's no background. I'm like, oh, yeah, normally I do scenery and vistas, but this was just a plain color. I didn't have like, her on a stage with the audience. Like, even that would have made it more interesting. It was like I'd gone too simple with it, and then expected people to have this emotional connection that when I look at it now, I'm like, oh, of course they didn't, because it's not emotional. There's nothing emotional about this. Whereas if I draw a woman looking out over the coffee region or over the coast, people have an emotional connection. They feel it, you know what I mean? And I think that in a way, you could say, okay, I creatively failed at the execution of that drawing, but it taught me something. So it's not a failure, because if you learn something from something not quite going how you wanted, then the next one's better because of that, then it's not a failure, is it? It's all part of the learnings of being an artist, being a creative. So yeah, I would look at it more like that.
I love what you're saying about like how you ask someone, right? Because I feel like when we look into the definitions of creativity, right? One of the things to be creative, for something to be creative or considered creative, it relates to that, like the audience that people relates to that, right? So I like probably to talk about a little bit more about your journey in like social media, right? Because social media, it's kind of a tricky, channel. Like there's so many emerging artists, so many like people trying to make it. How was that journey for you as a creative person, like, and how important was to listen, when it comes to be creative,
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're
to
building it,
the to your customers or potential
for sure.
customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people look at their followers like they're just people who are watching what they're doing, influencers or whatever. But when you're an artist and you're creating content that's like, drawings or that kind of, and you want people to respond to it positively, otherwise you wouldn't be posting it, you know what I mean? So you start to kind of uh, not create things just for them, but it's like you think, oh, I know my audience, like I know the kind of things that they like, and like fortunately I like drawing those as well, you know. So it crossed over. So then it's like, oh, I'm going to draw this, and then that's successful. Whereas I think if I just drew, and some artists do this, they just draw, they don't care what the followers say, they don't care how many likes they get, and that's great. But I think because now I'm here in Colombia and I'm drawing about Colombian things, I have to take into account the audience. Otherwise, I'm being a bit arrogant, and because they're giving me so many ideas, so much information that I then use in the drawings. So it's this collaborative project with me and them where they go, oh, that was my idea, or that was my response to his question. So they're feeling like not just like a spectator, they're feeling like a collaborator, and that's
Yes,
that's
such
what,
a contemporary yeah, such a contemporary view or approach to that, right? Because we got to consider our customers, or we got to consider people's opinions. At the end of the day, that's what social medias are all about, you know.
Yeah,
People have opinions, people, and when you think about creativity, you know, like just the input of someone else, it will make you more creative, you know, like just a feedback, it will make you more creative. And I love that you were humble enough to accept that, you know,
yeah,
like, and that's important when you're creative,
uh,
right, in anything, to be humble enough to receive feedback,
yeah.
because that feedback can make your prototype, or can make that business idea elevate, that can elevate that
Can I?
experience. You deal with, you know, like stereotypes, you know, people are very sensitive, especially when it comes to culture, you
Yeah,
know, and as someone white in a country like Colombia,
yeah,
how do you deal with that, you know, because like not everyone will receive it
no,
in the same way, I believe.
yeah,
So how is that experience for you? Like, and same thing, by the way, happened with me when I started Exotic, you know, like I was like, people didn't quite get it.
no,
People didn't understand it. And they're like, people have like these high expectations
yeah,
because you're portraying yourself as in my case, it was a Latin American restaurant. And then obviously the standards, but what they don't realize is just the whole behind the scenes, right? Like how it's so hard to bring ingredients in Australia. It won't be necessarily the same, and also the local touch that you gotta be connected to be able to like reach a wider audience. How is that for you as an artist?
yeah. I think being an artist means being an artist in the public eye. It means some people are going to love you, and others are going to hate what you do, or hate you, or both. You know what I mean? For whatever reason. I've got a lot of people who love what I do, who love the work I do and the creative side of things. And then I've got people who just despise me and project onto me, I think, you know, what they want me to be. Like they want me to be a symbol of something they don't like. You know what I mean? And I think that um, that just happens. You know, it happens with singers that you don't like, or bands that you don't like, or you know what I mean? Actors that you don't like. You don't know them personally, but they represent something that just pisses you off. And I'm like that for a lot of people. And when I say a lot, you know, like it's not like every day I'm getting messages of hate, but every now and then I'll draw something and I'll get a lot, you know, people unfollowing me or coming on my page and commenting, and they're not even following me and they say something negative. And you just sort of have to go, okay, this is part and parcel, you know, with being a creative in the public eye, an artist in the public eye. So you've got to take the good with the bad. And, you know, it doesn't mean you have to listen to them. It doesn't mean you have to engage with them. Um, you know, often people are critical because they're coming at it from a different perspective. You know what I mean?
Conservative, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Where do you draw the line, though? What do you draw the line to? And I agree with you. Like, you take on board feedback, but there is a way, there is some like something that you do, where a moment where you draw the line and you say, no, like,
no, exactly. You can't
okay,
listen to everyone. You know, you can't listen to
you
everyone.
can please, yeah.
And you become like a diluted version of yourself. So really, you just have to just charge forward and just not listen. You know, usually when I do something that gets some form of criticism, I'll sit back and look at it and go, okay, so why is that happening? You know, like because my intention is never
Of
um,
course, hurt anyone or her
that.
sensibilities or anything like that.
That's what makes me sleep fine. Because if I was drawing things to parody people in a negative way, or demean people, or to bully people, or any of that, then that would be different, because then I would have that on my conscious. But when your conscious is pure, and you're like, you know, I drew this picture that went viral called The Girls of Medellin, and I'd drawn the same drawing in Bogota and Cartagena with no problems. And in Medellin, I drew three paisas, and I wanted to capture the fashion and the style of how paisa girls looked. It was my first time in Medellin, and I
And
drew
you tell me before with what are paisas? Who are paisas? What
paisas
do you mean?
from Medellin or Antioquia, which is where Medellin is, and sometimes the coffee region, people considered paisas from there as well, but in this case it was specifically Medellin. And Medellin is, for anyone who knows about Colombia or Latin America, it's a very famous place for negative things in the 80s, like Pablo Escobar and cocaine and that kind of stuff. So it's very loaded with cultural trauma and cultural stereotypes and history and all that kind of stuff, which I knew about to an extent. But what I didn't know is that when I drew the girls of Medellin in a very matter-of-fact way, is like, this is how I saw them in the street, and I didn't draw them doing anything sexual or anything. It was just like, okay, tattoos and crop top and whatever it is. It was like this huge social media storm about this gringo, and I wasn't even like American. I always think gringo is American, but
Angora.
they were attacking me, and they were using me as like, they were calling me sex tourist, cocaine. I mean, none of these things that I do, but they wanted me to be that, so then they could portray me as the foreigner in Colombia who's disrespecting paisas. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it was like a love letter to paisas. And so I got a lot of messages of hatred, of all kinds of horrible things in this sort of 48-hour period. But then this huge wave of followers and a huge wave of support of other Colombians and other paisas who were like, no, he's great. He drew as accurate or whatever it is. So it taught me that being a polemic artist is not necessarily a bad thing commercially, because
No, it's not.
people hate Taylor Swift with a passion, or they love Taylor Swift like she's a god. You're nowhere in between, so it's like, I'd rather be Taylor Swift than that indie artist who no one knows about because no one really cares. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, it's like, okay, if a bit of that comes with being known, then I just have to accept it. I think less of it has come the more I've been here, because I think it's easy to paint people as a tourist or foreigner who's going to come and do this and then leave. But when you're living here and you've got a child here and you've got knowledge, and then having a good enough Spanish, it also helps people see that you're legit. You know what I mean? You're not just a tourist. You're someone who loves Colombia. You're someone who wants to live here for the rest of their life. I think what people think of me is definitely usually not what I'm like in reality. But the good thing is, if you like my drawings, you probably like me as a person, because it's a representation of how I see the world and how I see, life.
It's a poem. It's a poem to our culture, and it's like, it's great that you have managed to translate that into the world.
Yeah.
So people know more about, because it's also known that English, it's the language, one of the most spoken language. So if you manage to translate our culture into English, and with your perspective, it give the opportunity to, as a country, to get more tourism, and to, like, it's greater than
Yeah.
what we can think, right? Which is
Yeah.
the beauty of what you do,
Yeah. And I
and
think,
what I admire.
thank you. Yeah. Look, I think some countries are pretty well exposed. You know what I mean? Some countries, everyone knows they're good. Like, like everyone knows Italy is a beautiful place to visit and eat and travel. Like, like, it doesn't need people to tell you. But Colombia, because of,
No brainer.
yeah, and probably Venezuela is going through similar things now that Colombia went through in the past, where, people don't want to visit Venezuela because of the political problems or social problems. But the reality is, I know that if I went there, I'm sure I'd love many things. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's a sad part of politics, and is that it can sometimes wreck people's perception of what that country is. You know what I mean? And I think Australia's been really lucky because we haven't had that instability or violence or any of those things. But Latin America, from top to bottom, has been a history of tumultuous events, and I think people always see it as a dangerous place. You know what I mean? Like, I think people pick America from top to bottom as a dangerous place, but the reality is so not the case. You know what I mean?
I love what you're saying because for me, it's like, and I love what you said about Venezuela because Venezuela is a beautiful country, and this is what I explain to people because people know the negative, but they don't
Yeah,
know so much the positive.
yeah,
Like people in our countries are more friendly, warmer.
yeah, yeah,
That countries that like Australia, right? It's easier to make friends and to build connections. You literally can make a friend if you go to the supermarket,
yeah.
right? If you go
I
to do some
I always,
shopping.
I always think, why is that? Why do Australians who have got everything? I mean, like, like it's a blessed country. There's no wars, you got great weather, da da da. Da. But there's so many Australians with depression, and there's so many Australians who are kind of always thinking, like this thing. And then I think, oh, right. I think sometimes when you've seen what people don't have, and you've seen the terrible things, it makes you so grateful for what you do have, even if it is just a hot chocolate with your family, even if it is sitting in the neighborhood listening to music, drinking beer. Like, there's a beauty in Colombia of living in those little moments. You know what I mean? And I think you're saying everything moves fast, everything's in flux, everything's changing always. That people sometimes forget to just sit back.
Materialistic.
Yeah, people forget those little moments, and I think people love that. Australians love that when they can get those. They're like, oh yeah. When you go,
It feels good.
it's good, and I think that everything has to be. I feel like in Australia, everything has to be. Okay, what's next? Like, what's the next thing?
Right. Which in a way is an opportunity, Eddie, don't you think? Like, it's an opportunity for like artists like yourself, emerging artists, for like people like myself,
Mm.
to portray that because people love that, to create those spaces. What opportunities do you think are out there that you feel like people should be exploring or allowing themselves that opportunity to explore?
In Australia, or you mean in
In
general?
Australia or in
Mm.
Latin America or in general, obviously from a creative perspective, what would you think it will be, that?
It's a good question. I think it's like you've got like you because the world is so different now than it was pre 2020, right? Like everything
Mm.
changed, and our perspectives on the world changed. What we valued changed after all the pandemic stuff. You just thought, oh right, okay, just the simple things. I remember being in the pandemic and thinking, oh, I miss just walking into a bookshop. I couldn't go to a bookshop. Everything was shut. I was in Cartagena. It was completely dead. And I remember thinking, yeah, there's those little things, the little moments. So maybe as a result of such a big catastrophic world event, maybe in the coming years, we'll see more things that are quieter, that are more, and you do see it on Instagram. Like, there's a lot of stuff about like more kind of self-focused things, holistic things, rather than. But then a lot of people going the other way, and it's all material, 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 money, lifestyle. Like, I just can't stand Instagrams that are someone showing you how fancy their lifestyle is. I just think, so what? You know what I mean? Like, you live in Latin America for 10 minutes and you think, like, look at this person here. Like, they've been working this job for 50 years and they're great to talk to and they're happy. They don't need a Lamborghini and a private jet and all this stuff. I just think a lot of that stuff is such noise and so obnoxious. It exists here as well, obviously, because I think a lot of, the history of Colombia is like fast cash. How can you get fast cash to move up in the social, in the because there's a class system as there isn't in Australia.
Of course. Which is more prominent than here in Australia.
Like, okay, in Australia, there's some poor people, there's some working class, but most people in Australia are middle class.
Mm.
Majority of it.
True, yeah.
Some people are rich, great, but yeah, I just find there's a lot of this content now that it's very vacuous. So I think if, yeah, as creatives, let's try and create content that has a soul, that isn't just AI or isn't just about lifestyle or be about yourself, like, I'm so good because I'm doing this. Because there's a lot of preachy stuff as well on Instagram now. I see it as a parent. It's like, you should let your children do this, and if you don't, then look how good I am as a parent because I'm letting my children run through a forest every day. Whatever it is. You know what I mean? There's this sense of like holier than thou, which you do get on Instagram. But I think artists can't be like that. Artists have to be connect. You have to be able to connect to people at the most basic of human emotions. So I guess if I had any tip about, creative people, entrepreneurs, it's like think about the most basic things, that humans need and love.
That's a great advice, especially now with the whole AI and how we're exploring that. It's becoming daunting,
Yeah,
to a certain extent. So like there should be something that is the opposite to that, which is that
yeah,
connection,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
real connection and real
Because
socialization. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, I believe.
AI is going to exist. It's going to evolve. It's going to be used in multitudes of positive ways, And like my friend is an artist, and he's using it. He's using it with his art to help create, to bring his art to life, to make a movie and that kind of stuff. So, um, I think there's really great things about it, but I think, a lot of the time I kind of eye roll when I see, because I can just tell straight away, oh, that's an AI image that this brand has created instead of investing in, and I know why they're doing it. It's free, it's cheap, it's fast, and it looks polished. So a lot of people are going to use it. But when you see big brands using it, I'm like, what? Okay.
This is happening. So how do you feel about that as an artist? Because that's such a shock or such a like slap in your face. Like,
Yeah, I remember all the Ghibli. You remember the Ghibli portraits? Everyone was doing their face in Ghibli style, like the
yeah, that's
Japanese
right. Yeah.
anime, and doing couples, and them and their mother or them and their family. Everyone was posting these things. In that, I think it was a week or 2 weeks, I didn't get one portrait job, and I've had portrait jobs every single week since I've started doing them. So it was like, oh, that's either a coincidence
Opportunity.
or an opportunity, and I don't know what the opportunity is, but I've seen people take the opportunity. For example, and you see it in Colombia, because Colombians are very resourceful and very like Zorro, very and
Creative.
avispa, very wasp. So they basically got AI images, put them on sneakers, and now they're selling the sneakers. And I'm like, you just put that in, you just spat that out of Chat GPT, and you're selling it but people are buying them, and I'm like, oh, that kind of makes me feel a bit, you know what I mean? Like putting
Which
it,
is again another opportunity, right? To like sort of like because that's what we're exploring now. There's a lot of gaps in legislation to protect artists, to protect copyright, to protect, like all these, the rights of citizens and you name it, like all the different gaps around
yeah,
AI. That's an interesting field, right?
yeah,
For
like exactly.
the upcoming generation.
Yeah, because I think people will crave. Everyone always takes up those things really quickly. You know what I mean? It's like, um, you know, and then eventually they crave the opposite. It's like,
Yeah,
when you've been eating junk food for 3 days, what do you feel like? You feel like a nice home cooked meal, a salad.
solid.
Like,
So true, so true.
like,
Look at it. I'd like you to talk us about your because I love not you are a creative person, but you also have managed to put that into your books and like merchandise. Have used humor as well in everything that you do, which is such an Aussie thing, and I feel that's a common theme between our cultures. Like we make fun of everything pretty
yeah,
much.
yeah,
So how do you pack all of this, creative side of you, all these drawings into all these different pieces? Talk us through that. And you're currently actually doing a tour, like as
yeah,
well, like, and you're
yeah.
coming to Australia.
I think,
So we got an announcement with that one, which
yeah,
we're
exactly.
leaving to you.
I think as an artist, it's like you have to hustle. You know what I mean? Like, I think if you're an artist and you want to earn enough money to live, to live like, decent, you've got to hustle. And I think that like some days I'm like, oh God, I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish I didn't have to sell something. I wish I could just sit back and be an artist and draw. And there's been periods in my life where like, maybe I've saved up enough money, or like I wasn't desperate for money so I could do that. But when you're like, in a place where it is your full-time job. You know, you've got to keep stuff moving. It's like you need revenue streams, multiple revenue streams, because if you've just got one revenue stream and that dries up, so if I just did portraits, suddenly the week of AI or the month of AI, I'm not getting any portraits. So I like to do portraits. I sell my book. I sell clothing promo, cross promos on Instagram with brands. I do children's book illustrations. I do events illustrations, like big banners at events. So I've got sort of I do talks, as well. So I've got probably 7 or 8 revenue streams that between those I can usually make enough money to, pay all the bills in the month. In the past, I had some real success with merch. I did a merch range in 2022, and it was a lot of Colombian expressions and kind of fruity designs. I invested a bit of money in that, but then I made really good money. And then my book did really well as well. So I was in a position where I was like, okay, I could just spend this money, or I can just reinvest it back into my business. And that's what I like to do. Is if I ever get any larger amount of money or savings, I like to invest some of that back into a creative project that can then generate more income. Because suddenly, if you spend that money and then you're back to square one, sometimes it doesn't always completely work out. Like you might, invest too much and then not earn that money back fast enough. But generally, like 9 times out of 10, when I've invested in my own creative projects, I've made a profit in the end. So that's given me the confidence to be like, okay, I can do this. I just need to find ways of doing it. Sometimes it's more challenging, Notice that the more you need money, the less opportunities seem to come. Whereas when you're like good with money, all the opportunities come. Everyone wants to be a part of it, and it's an energy thing. I think it is. No one wants to give money to a poor person, but everyone wants to invest into someone who's got money. You know what I mean? So it's that mentality thing. And I think the energy that I put out on Instagram is another thing where you can't quantify it, but you can feel it. You can feel an energy on an Instagram page, like this person is desperate, or this person is confident, or this person is charismatic, or whatever it is, through their content, through their videos, drawings, posts. So I like to kind of keep the energy going as much as I can. It's a bit more difficult when you're a parent and you've only got so many hours in the day to create. The good thing is I've got a library of images that, I can repost. They're like new, even though I drew them 2 or 3 years ago or something. Yeah, I just like to keep activity happening, so your Instagram doesn't just die, like go dormant, because that doesn't help anyway.
Phil, I feel like you have used your creativity as well to monetize, to
Yeah,
find a ways to create revenue, to keep doing what you love doing, which is
yeah,
drawing, right?
yeah,
So look, Eddie, we're just almost at the end, and I'd like you to talk about like we have an announcement. You coming to Australia, you coming to Sydney, right here in Sydney, and we got a masterclass that is happening. So talk us a bit about your
yeah.
your tour going, and when will you be here in Australia? When is the masterclass happening? Where and what are we offering? It's an exciting collaboration
Yeah.
because we're doing here is we are combining 2 different worlds, which is like your creative side and mine, which is my business perspective, and creating collaboration that it will add value to people who will attend that, and in any sort of form they want, especially if they want to be entrepreneurs. It
Mm.
will help them in their journey. But yeah, tell us a bit more about.
The first drawing tour I did in 2023, I actually did one in Australia and one in USA, and it was amazing because, I knew I had followers there, but I really didn't know, I couldn't visualize how that was going to look, because I'd done some meet and greets in Colombia, and, that's fine. Maybe 20, 30 people come. And every city I went to in USA and Australia, it was like 100, 150 people, 200 people. It was such an amazing moment for me, because it was like, my drawings make even more impact for the people who are living outside of, Latin America, because they're missing all of the things that I'm about, even though they might enjoy their new country, their new home and their new lifestyle, their new wage, like these sort of things that you enjoy in Australia and USA, I think there's things you can't quantify that you miss, about Latin American countries. So I did these tours, and it was like such a success that I thought, oh, I've got to do this again. And basically, it happened because I put a call out to different brands who are following me, and I said, look, if you're a brand in New York and you want to, a coffee shop in New York is going to pay for my airfares, and someone else is going to pay for my hotel. And it was this kind of thing, piecing together like a tour, like a band would do with sponsors. And so I thought, look, I could try it again. Maybe I won't get anyone this time who's interested in being a part of it. And I've got like 12 of my businesses, including yours, who are putting in their support in return for me. In your case, it's obviously a masterclass, which is I've never done before, so it's really exciting. Someone else, it's a meet and greet in their cafe or their restaurant or a podcast or something like that. So it's really cool because I want to give, when people show you support, you want to give them everything, you know what I mean? And the support means a lot, because obviously flying myself, my partner and my child from, Colombia to Australia is expensive. So it
Good, yeah.
that, and the family side of things is great because he gets to see his grandparents, and she gets to meet all the family there and all that kind of stuff. And it's a special thing in that aspect. But then culturally, it's like I get to see the Colombians, the Latinos in Australia, and Australians, who follow me and come and see my book, get my books. I'll sign my book, and it's like that's such a double whammy of like things, and it's all thanks to Colombia, because without none of this would be possible, without particularly the Colombian support and obviously other Latino support as well, like yourself. So it's going to be a really fun trip. I based in Adelaide, so I'm doing meet and greets in Melbourne, and in Sydney I'm doing a meet and greet, I'm doing your masterclass, and I'm doing a podcast, and then in Adelaide I'm doing a meet and greet as well. So there'll be a few different events. Our masterclass, which will be I think 2:00 on the
3 p.m. Yeah, 3 p.m.
3 p.m. on the 24th. Was it 24th or 25th?
25th, Friday the 25th
Right, sorry, I'm bad
of
with
July.
dates.
That's okay, yeah.
Friday, 5th of July, we'll be doing a masterclass at the cafe was called Heaven. That's a good name.
Yeah.
Yes.
They will be in heaven, literally.
Yeah, Green Square. And I'm really looking forward to being there, and hopefully a lot of you guys come along and we can sort of get into a lot of this stuff deeper. I think when it's in person, you can do more than,
There's a lot of surprise. So we're going to be talking about
yeah,
like creativity, but we're going to be more practical though. And no, I don't want to ruin the surprise. I
no,
don't want to spoil it for anyone, but we have planned, like
yeah.
hard
You,
and
you,
long enough for this
right.
one. I think everyone will enjoy this one because it's really creative. It's something really creative, and I feel like it's gonna help a lot of people to
Yeah,
get them out of the comfort, what like to explore the creativity, to be more in connection of that curiosity. So it's going to be great, and it's like great collaborators as well. So it's going to be a small group though. So I feel like people need to start booking. So if you have any questions or anything that they could post it here.
yeah. Well,
And then yeah,
thanks so
I
much.
can't wait.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your support, because it's a hard thing sometimes, asking brands or asking businesses, if they want to be part of something like that, particularly when there's money involved. But when people believe in you and in what you do, it means the world. So, and that's how communities are created. That's how collaborations, relationships are forged, isn't it? It's usually like someone needs to help someone in some way, and then the other person, I was like, I can help you, you can help me. So it's going to be really fun.
It's going to be, yeah, and I feel like so you've been working a lot with the Colombian community, and this will be like it's bigger than what it looks, because it's like you're to the immigrants, to like Venezuelan, so like you also will do some drawings for me, so it's bigger than what it is. So I invite everyone to stay in tune to find out about all the details. Thank you, Eddie, for this time. It has
Thank you.
been, great to chat with you and to share all your experience as a creative, as an artist. It's really valuable, all those insights, and I think it can help a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs and someone who wants to innovate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.